what you want.
I want the facts.
Today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
And welcome back to the program. Sasha, great to have you with me. JD Vance, the man who would be king, or at least deputy king for now, and possibly being groomed for the top job. But he's got some very dodgy connections, hasn't he? He's not quite the clean-cut working-class boy made good, living the American dream in the 21st century to prove it's still alive that we're all led to believe he is he?
Yeah, it turns out not. I actually didn't know much about JD Vance until he was announced as Trump's running mate. And then, of course, it perked my interest. Up until then, I didn't know much.
I don't think any of us did.
Yeah. So I started looking, who is this 39-year-old venture capitalist working in pharmaceutical and biotechnology space, which is very familiar to me. So I found somebody actually posted on X, on Twitter, this article from 2022 written by Rolling Stone. And obviously it's a liberal media outlet. So they have their own bias, very obvious bias. And it was immediately obvious to me that these are the liberals are trying to paint other liberals as far-right, extremists. And also there was a very hilarious take on the biopharma and what happens there from the point of view of, the media outlet that supports all these biotechnological horror shows, trying to paint Vance as one of the, far-right pharma companies.
Yeah, he's got links to people, that associated with Palantir, groups like this, organizations heavily involved in surveillance. They are themselves tangentially linked to CrowdStrike and the outage, of course. I'm not saying he had anything to do with that, but he's got some wild ideas. I mean, I referenced flooding Gaza, believe it or not, was something he came up with the idea of. And indeed, he and Trump made common cause with the neo-fascists in the Israeli regime. Absolutely extraordinary stuff, particularly in the light of the ICJ ruling towards the end of last week that the entire Israeli presence in the West Bank and Gaza is illegal and should come to an end as soon as possible. To me, this points to a global constitutional crisis, for want of a better expression, because international law is totally disregarded and people like Vance seem to have nothing but contempt for it.
So Vance, to me, appears, from what I've read and what I looked at, and I'm now doing a more detailed dive into the background and what exactly his companies are working on and the connections. But to me, it looks like he's just another coin-operated, creature from the swamp that has, well, yeah, because his hypocrisy is obvious in what he does and what he funds and what he says in his books. So the morals that he exhibits, newly found conservative Catholic values, are nowhere to be found when he's making money. And that, for these people, that seems totally okay. And, the ends justify the means. So somehow he's associated with Peter Thiel, who owns Palantir, obviously.
That's right.
Totalitarian surveillance of everything.
Hello, Sasha. Sasha seems to have frozen for the moment. So in her absence, I will read her words. I tried to stay away from political news, and up to a few days ago didn't know JD Vance existed. However, this absolute pearl of journalism, this is the article she was referring to by the Rolling Stone in 2022, was hard to resist. It contains a lot of information which, when Vance was just another phony born-again conservative climbing the greasy pole, was not particularly interesting reading. But now that he's Trump's running mate, this deserves attention. Hence, a quick commentary. Establishment propagandists are trying to critique a plausible critique of another establishment creature simply too priceless as a spectacle. What kind of man profits from scalded money junk? Not a hard question. It's the same kind of man that profits from feeding live dogs' faces and sandflies just for fun. We know who she's talking about there. And experimenting on black orphans to death to make up the HIV virus story from which a massive government industrial complex would then profit. Have you met Anthony Fauci, Albert Bourla, Stefan Bancel, all the vaccinologists, all of BARDA, DARPA, DTRA, and all of their international medical countermeasures stakeholders? On the campaign trail, Trump-endorsed Ohio Senate nominee JD Vance leans into hard scrabble upbringing, which he wrote about, of course, in Hillbilly Elegy. He rails against universities and the abuses of big tech. He blasts COVID mandates, encouraging distrust without evidence of the long-term risks of mRNA vaccines. A recent convert to Catholicism, Vance insists he's 100% pro-life. Indeed, there's talk that he wants a federal ban on abortion. But in his life away from politics, Vance is a venture capitalist, and his values as an investor are far muddier. I'm reading from your article, Sasha. His firm, Naraya, is an investor in Hallow, a prayer app that's caught flack for allegedly seeking to profit off the intimate religious data of its users. Now, that's very interesting. I didn't think such a thing as a prayer app existed. I mean, they do. There are various apps, but clearly this is another interest from a surveillance state to know your religious beliefs, your information, and of course, this is some sort of a connection to SEAL, I'm sure, who wanted to vacuum that data as well. So it's ironic because, of course, if we go back 500 years, one of the sparks that lit the Reformation, of course, was the role of the priest in confession as the intermediary between the individual and God. You still have confessionals in the Catholic Church, and it's not surprising that Vance, therefore, converted to Catholicism. But most of the other religions, including Buddhism, Hinduism, the biggest religions in the world, and Islam as well, of course, as Christianity, Protestant Christianity, you can communicate with God directly yourself. So if prayer is simply between you and God, what do you need a mobile phone for, Sasha? I find that. Well,
I don't know. I don't use prayer apps, but I don't, think it's a bad thing either. If it helps people, if it maybe, it gives them some sort of a starting point to think from, maybe a verse from the Bible. Those are good things. But, of course, the apps always collect your data, and it's a valid concern, and people need to think about it. And so I myself, I prefer to read books, and I prefer to think and communicate directly to God. But, I don't judge what other people's religious practices are. Now, he clearly tried to profit off of this. My bigger concern is his apparent very, very deep ties to the mRNA technology, to biotechnological experimentation.
Sorry, let me just hold on for a moment there, because is he not an opponent of all these things? Does he not talk about the long-term risks of the mRNA vaccines and rail against the COVID mandates? How come he's, on the other hand, involved in these technologies? That would make him a hypocrite.
Of course it does. So he talks about it on the campaign trail, or he talks about it in speeches and elsewhere on social media. He criticizes COVID vaccine mandates, while his company, Amplify Bio in San Francisco, has COVID vaccine mandate for employment. And so that's a bigger hypocrisy is hard to find. In addition, his company is using, of course, all the conventional pharmaceutical cell line testings, which these cell lines are coming from aborted fetal cells. And when Rolling Stone journalists did a piece of journalism and asked them about it, the company said, well, why, of course, we don't directly do this, but it would be, strange for us not to do it because the entire industry is using these cell lines. We would lose business if we didn't use these cell lines. So, of course, for Vance, as a venture capitalist, he would lose money if he refused to do it. So he does it. and that seems okay.
Absolutely extraordinary, these people. That's all I can say. We're going to take a very short break now. When we come back, I'm going to ask Sasha whether she agrees with me that there's been a kind of soft coup in the United States over the last 48 hours, and that we may indeed only be halfway through it. We'll be right back after this short break.
Today's News Talk Radio.
Come on, let the man talk.
We never censor our hosts.
Good. Now, talk.
Uncensored news. Today's News Talk Radio. TNT.
And just like the infographic showed us, there we are indeed uncensored here on TNT. You can't say that for the corporate networks at all. I'm delighted to say I'm joined still by Sasha Latypova, who's got more on JD Vance before we pivot to the current situation. Let's hear the rest of the goods on him. I'm all ears, Sasha.
Right. So I became interested in his company, MON-FRI Bio, which seems to be a service provider to pharmaceutical industry, which I worked in the sector myself. So this is very, very familiar to me. And it seems that his company was set up, actually, the parent company is Battelle Institute. And I started looking into what Battelle is. And it appears to be a front pretending to be some sort of a nonprofit networking between government and private industry. But what appears, they're getting huge contracts especially from the defense department, including DARPA, BARDA, DITRA, other agencies of the defense, especially biodefense, which is the part of the Department of Defense in the United States that's very interested in bioweapons development and that is very interested in mRNA. And so this Battelle Corporation, who has huge grants from the Department of Defense, including I found $22 million for bioweapons, for biological biodefense, they call biodefense development, and other very large grants like $350 million for some vehicles. And then they funnel these projects to companies that they directly control or have friends or networks. So, for example, Battelle is a parent company for MON-FRI Bio, which is JD Vance's company, and they give them grants or funnel these grants from biodefense to work on, the cover story for bioweapons development is always we're working on the infectious disease and vaccines. And so one of the papers, which I found, had horrific experimentation on animals, injecting them directly into the brain with a chimeric, what they call vaccine and virus. In the same paper, they call it a chimeric vaccine and a chimeric virus. It's the same exact substance, which contains a backbone of live replicating virus, including Ebola genes and Nipah virus genes. And so they test this substance by directly injecting it into the brains of mice, hamsters, and monkeys. So I was horrified. I worked in the industry.
These people are cruel to the point of insanity.
It's cruel to the point of insanity, and there is no scientific reason to do it this way. In fact, I was so puzzled by it. I searched on different search engines trying to find this specific route of injection. They call it intrathalamus injection route, which is directly into the brain, into the region that's called thalamus in the brain. I couldn't find, it was very hard to find any references to this injection route, except this particular study. So they're telling us this is some sort of standard science that they need to do to study vaccines. It's not. And I'm looking more closely into this paper. It appears to me that the Defense Department is working on bioweapons. This is a known way of coming up with new toxins and new pathogens, is this kinds of poisoning of animals. And then covering it up with infectious disease research. So that's what it appears to me to be. And JD Vance is front and center in this, one of the central labs that did this study.
My goodness me. No wonder he's quite happy to flood the whole of Gaza and kill 2 million people. It's extraordinary how somebody who can appear to make sense about an issue like the United States southern border can at the same time be that can be masking the sort of total moral cesspit that lurks beneath the surface. But I'm afraid to say that's true of many US politicians. In fact, it may even be a requirement. I've seen conspiracy theories in the past that say, unless you're prepared to do pretty dastardly things, you don't get anywhere near the top job, which brings us neatly on to the next subject, which you can talk to me about after the headlines, Sasha, which is the extraordinary events of the last 48 hours in and around the White House with the coronation of Kamala Harris as the Democratic nominee. It really is all over. When the weekend there was supposed to be some sort of contest about to take place. So extraordinarily, Donna Brazile and a handful of other powerful black women sprang straight into action to raise the money and get the delegates behind Kamala, so that it became a foregone conclusion, seeing this as a unique opportunity afforded by history. So whether or not they succeed, or whether indeed there will be a counter coup over the next couple of weeks, because of course Harris is very, 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 very slightly less supportive of the genocide than her boss, still Joe Biden. Though, of course, he himself is completely irrelevant because he's senile, and I shouldn't think anybody's paying any attention to him at all. So we're going to take a very short break for the headlines now. And when we come back, I'd be delighted to get your thoughts on that particular mess. We'll be right back after this short break.
Deadline. TNT Radio News.
Big news.
Yeah! Let's go!
And welcome back to the Patrick Henningsen Show with me, Basil Valentine, sitting in for Patrick. Kamala Harris praised the emotion shown by some of the anti-genocide protesters during the college campus demonstrations a few weeks ago. And of course, for that, she's been criticized because you have to be absolutely full-throated in your support for genocide and condemn anybody who opposes it as a virulent anti-Semite who wants to recreate the events of the Second World War. Such is the ludicrous state of the debate in the United States. Hence, Donna Brazile and the others who caucused so effectively for her to get the nomination over the last 48 hours may not be the most obvious king, or in this case, queen makers in the White House. So, I mean, this really has been the most extraordinary week or 10 days in American politics that I can remember. Do you think Harris has got the nomination for keeps? Perhaps there'll be a pushback? Would you agree with Donald Trump that she'll be easier to beat than Joe Biden? I don't. Take your pick of those and the myriad other talking points to have come out of the last 10 days, Sasha.
Yeah, but that's the reason I try to avoid politics altogether. And my Substack is not focused on politics. But this, you're right. This last several days have been just a ridiculous tragic comedy. I don't know how to call it. And I'm coming, I lived through the collapse of the Soviet Union. I lived through the coup and, Gorbachev getting arrested in Crimea and things like that. So I can't believe I have to go through this again. And I mean, so to me, this is ridiculous. What they're trying to do. So I'm not sure that Biden is alive. Many commentators are calling for proof of life. And we're not sure what is is she the nominee? Is she the president? What's the protocol? They were also posting a bunch of so-called continuity of government executive orders. Again, not
I
clear.
haven't seen that. That's been evoked, has it, to some degree, or people suggesting that it needs to be?
People are asking. There have been several executive orders issued supposedly by Biden, delegating authority to, I think, Secretary of State and Treasury and things like that. And many people were asking, what is this? Who is in charge? There were some commenters last night I found very funny. They said, maybe Putin can call the red phone and see who answers. And then And I think that's a valid way to find out. So that's a big question. Who is running the government? Who is the head of the government? What is the protocol if there is any sort of disaster action attack? Who is the commander in chief? I mean, so all of those are questions. Now, I have been telling people that we have been living under a military coup since at least 2020, since when they announced this COVID so-called pandemic, which wasn't a pandemic, it was a military attack masquerading as a public health crisis. So in my opinion, we have been under a coup, and whatever, Biden was doing, it's a senile puppet in the White House, made no difference whatsoever. And now likely the people behind us it seems that they are in disarray, that plans have gone awry. And what we're seeing is sort of them scrambling for presenting some sort of cohesive front, but it's not working. So I don't know the answers to these questions, but we should watch what happens.
I mean, I can't help thinking that this is, well, obviously it's a total reboot of the campaign, a game changer. And I think for all that she was an appalling candidate in 2020 and dropped out before the first votes would be cast in Iowa. I mean, let's not forget that Biden was a terrible candidate. They rigged all the primaries so that he got the job. So, in a two-horse race, I mean, I say that I'd like to see, more people voting for some of the minor candidates and far greater plurality in American politics and indeed in British politics. But in as much as the likelihood is that one of two people will be president, I think Kamala Harris has got a much, much, much better chance than some of the talking heads are giving her credit for. She plans to focus the entire election on women's reproductive rights, as well as, of course, claiming that Biden has actually done well for the economy. She can't talk about crime. She can't talk about the southern border, which has been a disaster. Trump will doubtless land a lot of punches on her over those matters. But by talking about women's reproductive rights, identity politics will undoubtedly be at the fore. And whoever she picks as a running mate, the Democrats are going to have what they call a balanced ticket of diverse individuals, even if she picks a white man, whereas the Republicans have got two white men. And it's not necessarily going to play well with the corporate networks and their wokeism these days, Sasha.
Yeah, these competitive, race Olympics and the diversity Olympics and all these, fake distractions and divisive issues that they on purpose create so that people at each other's throats all the time help them control and dominate, and that's how they win against the people. And that's what, again, I encourage people to see through this deception that they're playing, and these fake race cards. Everyone says, she's a black female. She's not black. She's not African. She's Indian, which is white, and Jamaican. Okay, so this is as fake as it gets, and so I don't support any current politicians, by the way, not on the Democrat, nor on the Republican side. I think they are. Both sides are thoroughly bought by these corporate interests, especially the military interests, as I have been demonstrating with, writing about JD Vance and other issues. And so we need to understand that, and we need to not give them the trust, not give them support. Don't send them the money. I would turn off completely from this and see them run into the ground, and then we can rebuild properly and do a proper reform.
Indeed, I did have high hopes for Robert F. Kennedy at the start of the campaign, but turns out he's a big fan of genocide, which extraordinarily stands for somebody who claims to be anti-war. Sasha, you are one of the rare voices of sanity from across the pond. I love the pictures you've got on your Substack of Lake Tahoe and its environment. I'd love to get up there one day myself. Please come. Where can people find your writings and research?
So I write primarily on Substack, and my publication is called Due Diligence and Art, or you can just search by my name. And so that's my primary spot. And then I occasionally also post on Twitter X, but they still suppress Substack, so it's kind of difficult. But you can find my writing and detailed analysis, all the documentation. Try to be as factual as I can. Follow me on Substack.
Thank you very much this afternoon for joining us, Sasha Latypova.
Thank you.
We're going to take a short break. When we come back, I'll be joined from the Donbass by independent journalist Johnny H., and we'll have some of the footage that he shot there yesterday, which carries with it a warning. You need a strong stomach for this because people died there yesterday. I'll get the latest from Johnny after this very short break.
On air 24/7. This is today's News Talk TNT.